this was a good movie. This really was a really good movie. And as I said in my non-spoiler review, it's not quite as good as the first movie, but, the first movie just has a slight edge to it. But this movie, Wonder Woman 1984, is still a really good movie, and I had a great time watching it, and I really enjoyed this movie. And we're about to talk about all the spoilers for this movie. So obviously, if you haven't seen the movie by now and you don't want to know about the spoilers, then what are you doing here? So now that that's out of the way, I would also like to mention that this isn't really like a standard review. If you want to hear my thoughts and opinions on the different characters and their journeys through the movie and stuff like that, then check out my non-spoiler review. I go much more into detail and stuff like that there, just so that I can kind of like make it a different experience. So then if you watch both videos, both non-spoiler and spoiler reviews, it doesn't feel like you're watching the same thing, just with new details here. So definitely check that out if you haven't seen it yet. But with this one, like I said, we are talking about the spoilers, and I'm basically just going to break down all the big spoilery moments from this movie and just my thoughts and opinions on what happened. And I want to go ahead and start off with that opening scene in Themyscira with the Amazons, where we had a young Diana, and we had kind of like this Amazon Olympics type thing going on here. And I really enjoyed this scene. Like, first of all, it was just so beautiful. Like the waterfall, the lake or the ocean, the grass, and the way like how they had to shoot the arrow, and then it had the different colored poofy smoke or whatever that came out of it. That was really cool. And how they had the flags. That was just an amazing opening scene, and that really gets me excited for that Amazon spin-off series or movie, whatever's happening. Hopefully it ends up being an HBO Max series. I've done other videos on it on my channel, so definitely check those out if you haven't seen them already. But this really was just a beautiful opening scene that didn't really have much to do with the rest of the movie, but it was kind of a nice scene to get you back into the the mood of Wonder Woman and the mythology of Wonder Woman and the Themyscirans. Now, let's talk about Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman, Gal Gadot, the main character of this movie. She's great. I mentioned this so many times in my non-spoiler review. Gal Gadot she just is Wonder Woman. Like, when I think of Wonder Woman, I think of Gal Gadot, because she is just so perfect for this role, and I loved her in this movie. Now, one of the things that's kind of confusing about this movie, that is kind of like a huge retcon, is Wonder Woman herself, because when we saw her in Batman v Superman and also in Justice League, it was kind of obvious that Wonder Woman had been in the shadows. She had been fighting crime this whole time, but she wasn't a public hero. And really the only actual evidence of her was, of course, that photo with Steve and the other characters from the first movie. So with this movie, seeing her out in the open, being Wonder Woman and being a superhero in public, and then literally her being on TV at the end of the movie when she was talking to all the people, telling them to renounce their wishes and everything, how would nobody remember that? Like, it'd be kind of hard to forget. So I'm pretty sure they are kind of retconning things here, and they are changing a lot from what we had before with the Snyderverse. So it really doesn't bother me that much, but it is something that I did want to just throw in here and mention. And then also another big part of this movie with Diana is her losing her powers. And this was actually something we heard about via plot leaks, but I really liked how it played out, because even though, like, for example, I knew that she was going to lose her powers in this movie, I like how it was explained, and I'll get into this more later when I talk about Maxwell Lord with the Dreamstone and how with your wishes you had a consequence, so I really like that twist on it as well. But of course, Diana's wish was to bring back Steve, and Steve in this movie was great. It was great to see their relationship again. It was great to see them back in action together. And, Steve coming back, like I said in my non-spoiler review, wasn't really necessary, but it was cool to see him back, and the way they brought him back, it made sense with the plot of this movie, and it tied into the main plot. But at the same time, there were also some weird parts to it, like the fact that, he was in this other guy's body. And that was kind of something that they didn't really need to do. Like, literally, they could have just had it like, oh, Steve is back, and that's just it. Steve is back instead of having him in this other guy's body, especially when Diana and Steve, they slept together. So she kind of just used that other guy's body. And at the same time, also, I don't think, at least this is the way I comprehended it, that actually looked like the other guy, and it's just that Diana, since she knew that was him, that's just the way she saw it, and that's why he looked like Chris Pine. That's the reason he looked like Steve Trevor. But to everybody else who didn't know that was Steve Trevor, probably just looked like that other guy. So that was kind of weird, and a weird way to do it that really wasn't necessary. But at the same time, it was an interesting take, but then again, it didn't really need to happen. Although I didn't like at the end when Diana saw that guy and it was Christmas and they're like, Merry Christmas. Oh, hey, I like that outfit and, all that good stuff there. So that was cool to see. And I loved Steve in this movie because in the first movie where we had Diana, she was kind of like the fish out of water, not knowing anything about mankind and all these different inventions and stuff like that. I loved how you had that same kind of dynamic here with Steve, but it was the opposite, kind of, because with Diana in the first movie, she was just confused about everything. But with this one, Steve, of course, he was confused about a bunch of different things, like, does everybody wear parachute pants now? That kind of thing. But I love how it was kind of more how he was so amazed and surprised, like how we saw how far mankind had come with like the new planes and spaceships and stuff like that. And it was kind of more like he was just proud of what humankind had been able to accomplish, and that was a really cool take on this, so that we didn't just see the same thing we saw with Diane in the first film. So I really like seeing that here. Then, of course, we did also get the final goodbye between Diana and Steve. She had to give him up so that she could get her powers back, so she could defeat Cheetah and Maxwell Lord and all that stuff. And this definitely wasn't as good of a goodbye as we had with Steve's sacrifice in the first movie. But, at the same time, I'm just going to say it wasn't really that good, in my honest opinion, because it kind of just came out of nowhere. Literally, he just started talking to her, pulled her aside, and then he was like, oh yeah, you need to give me up and all that stuff. And I was kind of a little confused, that maybe because I wasn't completely paying attention at the time, because I was eating popcorn, and that was some good popcorn, and I was kind of focused on that, and I was like, oh, Steve, what are you talking about? Oh. And then he was just gone, and she just ran away. And that was an awesome scene. And I loved how it was done, how Diana, she didn't look back. She just had to keep running because she knew what she had to do. So it was an awesome scene. But I feel like it just came out of nowhere. And throughout the whole movie, you saw the hints and teases of that like, she's going to have to give him up. And that's what I was kind of theorizing about going into this. But I still just feel like it kind of came out of nowhere with that part. Now, let's move on to Maxwell Lord, who was the big villain of this movie, the one who caused all of this madness, and this was a really cool character. I talked about him a lot in my non-spoiler review, about how surprising this character was, because we didn't expect him to be this good, but he really was such an amazing character, and Pedro Pascal is such an amazing actor, and this role was just so awesome. And I loved how at the beginning there was kind of like a surprise cameo type thing. I don't know what the actor's name was, but the first guy that Maxwell Lord was in business with, his name was Simon Stagg. And when he first started talking to him, Max kept calling him Simon. I was like, oh, is that Simon Stagg? And then later they called him Mr. Stagg. So that was Simon Stagg. And if you don't know, in the comics, Simon Stagg is a big DC villain, actually. And he has huge ties to the origin of Metamorpho. So, there's some hints and, I guess, set up for that. But at the same time, this takes place in the 80s, so present day, that guy would probably be dead. But who knows? It was a nice little reference in that I like seeing. And I something I really wasn't expecting was that we knew going into this movie that Max's big thing was that he needed to get the Dreamstone, but we didn't know why he needed it or what he wanted to do with it, because I was like, all right, now that he's got the stone, what's he gonna do with it? Like, what's he gonna do with his one wish? And then how he used it to become the Dreamstone, that definitely wasn't something I was expecting, and I really love that. And, usually, like, you see in TV shows and movies all the time, when there's, like, a genie or something, and you get 3 wishes, people are like, oh, I wish for infinite wishes, and then the genie is like, oh, you can't do that. So they kind of like broke the rules here, like, oh yeah, you can do this, so infinite wishes for you, except they put a twist on it. So when it first happened, I thought that it would just be, oh, now Max can make as many wishes as he wants. But no, it's actually that the other people have to make the wishes, and Max is the one that grants them. And like I talked about before with Diana, how each of these wishes has a different consequence. With Diana, she got Steve back, but she lost her powers. And I really loved seeing that. It was just so different from what I was expecting to see here. And it really was a nice little twist that kind of, kept me on the edge of my seat to see, like, oh, what's going to happen next? What is, like, how does this work? Because throughout the movie, like, you didn't know the whole time how this thing worked. And you kind of learn more about it every scene. And I really enjoyed that, kind of like with the mystery of, like, how does this Dreamstone work? Now, another character that got their wish granted was Barbara. And she wanted to be more like Diana. And obviously by the end of the movie, we saw her become the cheetah as she went through this whole transformation and evolution here. And I talked about her quite a bit in my non-spoiler review. And that final battle when she was finally cheetah, I mean, first of all, it wasn't really explained how she became cheetah. Like, she told Max, like, I want to be an apex predator. And I was like, okay. But then all of a sudden, the next time you see her, she's just cheetah. And it's like, okay then. I mean, it's cool, but don't really know how it happened. And why are you a cat lady? But whatever, that a lot of things in this movie you kind of have to just go with it and kind of ignore, like, alright, let's just pretend that makes sense. But the actual battle itself really wasn't that good. It did look like more of a Cirque du Soleil performance, which was cool to see and everything, but it just didn't feel like it was what it should have been, with Cheetah being Wonder Woman's arch enemy in the comics and her main villain. Plus, also, the whole thing was that Cheetah, and with Barbara's wish, was that she was supposed to be like Diana, and she was supposed to have the similar powers to her. So how come Cheetah was defeated by getting electrocuted? Because that's not something that stops Wonder Woman, so why would that stop Cheetah? I mean, it made sense at the same time because, like, cats hate water, so she was in the water and everything. So that was kind of like a little inside joke type thing there. But it kind of didn't make sense, but once again, you kind of just have to go with it. But another thing that didn't make sense with this character was, did she renounce her wish? Because when we saw Wonder Woman, she was telling the whole world, and everybody was renouncing their wishes and everything, which also, like, you'd think there'd be, like, at least one person who would be like, nah, I'm gonna keep my wish, like, I'm doing good here, so let's keep going here. Like, you'd think there'd be at least one person like that, especially Barbara, because she literally told Diana, like, no, I'm never going to renounce my wish. But then the next scene you see her in, which, first of all, I thought she was dead after she got electrocuted, but then you see her, and she's back to normal Barbara mode again. And it's like, okay, did she renounce her wish? Because it didn't seem like something she would have wanted to do, unless Diana's speech somehow empowered her and, inspired her, but she's a villain, that shouldn't have worked on her. So it didn't make sense. It could also be because he renounced his wish, maybe that kind of shut down everybody's wish, so that could make sense there. But I think it would have been nice if, when you saw Barbara again, that she was still Cheetah and she still just ran off. So you saw that she still had that darkness inside her to the point where she would not renounce her wish, and that she's still just out there. And that's another thing, because I want to see this character return, because she is Wonder Woman's arch enemy, and because she had such a small role in this movie. I would love to see her be the main villain of maybe Wonder Woman 3, or at least have a bigger role in that movie, or even some other movie, maybe join the Legion of Doom at some point. But the fact that she is just regular Barbara now, I don't know how that could happen. It's the same with all these other characters, because this movie takes place in the 80s, and from what we've heard, this third Wonder Woman movie, it takes place in present day. So now that, like, Barbara, she is a regular person and she doesn't have her cheater powers, she's probably going to die of old age. And going into this, I thought, like, oh, somehow maybe she'll be able to keep her cheetah powers, and that's how she'll be able to live to come back in present day. But now that she's just Barbara, how is she going to live that long? So, I don't know. I hope she comes back, and I hope she's cheetah again. Just not exactly sure how it's going to happen. Maybe they could go a more comics accurate route with it. We'll see. But now that we've talked about all the main characters, let's talk about some other crazy parts here, like my favorite scene with the invisible jet. This was something so crazy, something we theorized about a bit when we saw the scene in the trailer with Diana and Steve in the plane, and we're like, oh, is it the invisible jet and everything? And we eventually came to the conclusion, like, oh, it's probably not. But then it was, and it was such an amazing scene. You know, it was kind of weird to find out that, oh, the lasso of truth can now conceal things and turn things invisible. So that was a weird thing to find out. But, you know, I'm just going to go with it. I think it's cool. And the way they explained it, that it was like, oh, the same way that they concealed Themyscira so nobody can see it. So it was a cool way of explaining it, and how also Diana can control it, because with the invisible jet, it was always kind of like, oh, it's just an invisible jet. Like, how does she see to get into this thing if it's invisible? So I like how there's a bit more logic here. Plus, it was just such a beautiful scene. Seeing those two flying through the air in an invisible jet was awesome. And then how they flew through the fireworks and everything, that was just beautiful to see, and I loved seeing that. Then, speaking of flying through the air, Wonder Woman can fly. So that is absolutely crazy, because going into this, another theory we had was that Diana would be able to fly, and there were things in the trailers that kind of teased us with that. But then in a newer trailer, we saw, like, oh, she's not flying through the air, she's lassoed onto a plane or something. But she did end up flying, and that was something I loved seeing in this movie, because, you know, Wonder Woman doesn't always fly, but when she does, it's definitely cool. And it does make me think, like, why didn't she do this in Justice League or Batman v Superman? But again, just ignore it, just go with it. She looked amazing, she looked awesome, just floating and gliding through the air. It was just beautiful, and I loved seeing that. Now, finally, real quick, let's talk about that final battle, the big finale with Maxwell Lord. And, you know, with big superhero movies like this, usually you have a big final battle, which I guess was kind of with Cheetah here. But in this one, it was more of a confrontation, more of an inspirational speech. And I loved how when Diana said, like, I'm not talking to you, because up until that point, I was like, why are you telling him this? He clearly is not going to renounce his wish. But then I loved how she was on TV and she was talking to everybody, and everybody was seeing all that stuff. And I love how everybody was inspired by that, and it made people realize that their wishes, you know, people ended up dead. So I loved seeing that part, and it was really cool to see. And even though I usually don't like villains getting redeemed, I feel like Maxwell Lord's redemption here was very earned, and how it was all about his son, because that's really what the whole thing was about. He wanted his son to look up to him, and for him to look up to his father, who would be this big, powerful, rich man. So I really loved that full circle character arc there with Maxwell Lord. Another one of the reasons he was just such a great character in this movie. Now, finally, even though I just said finally, the post-credit scene was awesome, but I'm actually going to talk about that in a separate video, just so I can keep my thoughts contained on that. So definitely stay tuned and look forward to that. But other than that, guys, that is pretty much my spoiler review for Wonder Woman 1984. This was a great movie. I really enjoyed this. I really had a good time watching this. I loved all the little surprises in here and fan service moments, like the invisible jet, like her flying, and Simon Stagg even. Like, there were just some really cool moments in here that I loved to see. And I can't wait to see what happens with Wonder Woman 3 or even that Amazon spin-off project. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But this movie, I think I'd say I'd give it maybe like a 7 out of 10 stars, 7.5, maybe something along those lines. That's what I'll go with for now. But guys, let me know down in the comments below, what did you think about this movie? What did you think about my full-on spoiler breakdown of here? What were your favorite moments? And because this is the spoiler review, you can talk about all the spoilers you want, because hopefully nobody is stupid enough to go down there and read spoilers if they haven't seen the movie yet. So guys, like I said, stay tuned for the post-credit scene breakdown and other DC news videos and all that good stuff. So thanks so much for watching. Please drop a like if you enjoyed this video and hit the subscribe button so I can keep you up to date on everything that goes on in the DC life.